Hi, this is Lee Phillips. I want to talk to you for 2 seconds about what's called a self-settled trust. The concept is you take assets and you put them into a trust. It's an irrevocable trust. So you have permanently put the assets into the trust, which means that they're protected from your creditors. And we can do that in most cases. The place where you can't get away with it is if you are the beneficiary of the trust. If I make my kids the beneficiary of the trust, I can move the assets into the irrevocable trust, make them the beneficiaries, and as long as it wasn't a fraudulent conveyance, those assets are now protected from my creditors. It works well. However, a self-settled trust is where I create an irrevocable trust and make myself the beneficiary. That, in theory, doesn't work under the law. I'm going to give you 2 exceptions. Well, the law doesn't like you to be able to cheat your creditors, basically. There are 2 exceptions. One is the states are creating what we call asset protection trusts. And there's another YouTube video on asset protection trusts, all right? But at any rate, the state allows you to create a trust in their state, managed by a trustee in their state, usually a bank, and you can still be the beneficiary. And we talk about problems with that in the Asset Protection Trust YouTube, but generally there are a dozen states that will let you do that now. You can't be a resident of in many cases you can't be a resident of the state. It takes so long for the assets to actually lock down into the irrevocable trust. So there are lots of ifs, ands, and buts on it. The other exception is if I have a couple and I know one of the spouses is going to die, the government says they'll cut you some slack if you're willing to die, okay? So if a spouse is dying, I can isolate all of the assets into an irrevocable trust that is created after or upon their death. That trust now holds assets which are free from the creditors of the deceased spouse, creditors of the surviving spouse. Those are just in a safe deposit trust, basically, and the surviving spouse can still be the beneficiary. So basically I've created, although technically I haven't, but I've basically created a self-settled trust, and it works okay. So if you're in one of the dozen or so states that allow asset protection trusts, you can set up a trust within those states, and you don't have to be a resident of the state, and protect assets under their rules. Or we can use the living revocable trust, lock the assets down in it. When the spouse dies, it then becomes an irrevocable trust, but the surviving spouse can be the beneficiary. Those are called self-settled trusts, and generally a self-settled trust is a no, can't do that, except for these 2 exceptions.